Balaam's riddle revealed, a short Dvar Torah for Parashat Balak. Parashat Balak challenges the Torah learner on many levels, from the very existence of an entire portion told from a perspective other than the Israelite viewpoint, to the content of Balaam's blessing, which I want to focus on. Or more precisely, one recurring word in Balaam's blessing. The word is mashal, parable, or proverb. To understand the framework in which our discussion will take place, it's worth beginning with a brief introduction. There are different layers through which one can understand the Torah. Various commentators have addressed the four parts of Pardes: Pshat, literal; Remez, allegorical; Drash, homiletical; and Sod, mystical, each according to the purpose of their commentary. The problem begins when the verses take on a different character than expected. That is, it's easy to say a verse never departs from the plain meaning, from the pshat, when discussing verses with a legal character, or even verses with a narrative historical character. Things get more complicated when the Torah defines the verses as a mashal. From here on, we'll try to understand how 5 plain-sense pashtanim commentators deal with this phenomenon, each in their own way. I won't discuss the commentators in chronological order, but according to the interpretive traits I identify in them. We'll start with the commentary of the supreme literalist Rashbam. Rashbam sees no reason to deviate from his usual practice in the rest of the Torah, and like everywhere else, interprets our verses according to the plain sense. He will explain words like ka'ahalot, like myrrh and aloes, grammar, like ka'arazim, like cedars by the water, with a patach, because it's in the place of a chataf, and context, like sometimes falling, lying down at night, and sometimes with open eyes during the day, for now his prophecies were during the day. Some might argue that he deviates from his literal approach and interprets, and his king shall be higher than Agag, Shaul, putting information in Balaam's mouth that postdates Balaam's time. Considering, however, that he understands this to be a prophecy, and defines prophecy as what is to come now, tomorrow, or after many days and years, he will tell them today through a prophet, I don't think he sees this as a deviation. The next literalist we refer to is Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra presents his approach to the parables each time the word mashal is mentioned in the portion. He took up his parable, Vayisa Meshalo, says Ibn Ezra, the parable is from the top of rocks, or it is like the horns of a wild ox, like a lion that rises, and the parable is like brooks that stretch out, and the parable is a star and a scepter, etc. Various interpreters of Ibn Ezra want to claim that Ibn Ezra explains that the parable in question begins with the mentioned words. That is, skipping the introductory words such as, from Aram Balak has brought me the king of Moab, and so on. I think Ibn Ezra is precise in his choice of words. In my opinion, Ibn Ezra explains that he believes a parable is a simile with Balaam's words and not all of Balaam's words. The background story is just a way to get to the body of the parable, which is the simile. Later, he will also explain the simile itself. The difference between the approaches of these two giants of plain sense interpretation, I believe, stems from their perception of their role as commentators. Ibn Ezra, as he emphasizes in the parable of a dot and the circle in his introduction to the Torah, sees his role as revealing the truth embedded in the verses of the Torah through the meaning of the words and the story. This is the truth. Therefore, he must focus on it. If the character of the verses is homiletical, the truth, and consequently the nature of the interpretation, will change with them. Rashbam defines his role differently. From his perspective, the truth has already been interpreted by the sages in their homiletical interpretation, and his plain sense interpretation is intended to do something else entirely, to explain the plain meaning, the verses. Therefore, regardless of the nature of the text he's interpreting, Rashbam will focus on its plain meaning. The third commentator whose approach we'll touch on is Rashi. It would have been hard to blame me if I'd have ignored Rashi's commentary, because his words are often perceived as homiletical, even in the rest of the Torah. But Rashi's choice to distill the words of the sages on which he relies and adapt them to his approach points to something else. I won't pretend to delve into the depth of Rashi's method. I will suggest, based on his many commentators, and especially the commentaries of the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose commentary I started studying recently, that Rashi adapts his commentary to the nature of the verse. Therefore, when he speaks of the Israelites studying Torah under the wings of divine presence, mentions the verse from Ishaya, and chooses more than one interpretation for a single verse, his commentators will not accept that this is arbitrary. Rather, they will look for the reasons that led Rashi to this interpretation, or, as Nechama Leibovich demanded of her students, they will formulate what bothered Rashi. The last two commentators will deal with choose to eliminate the parabolical nature of Balaam's parables differently. Rabbi Ovadia Sforno explains that although Balaam saw a parable, the verses we received are after mediation. Or, in his words, he took up his parable, he said that parable which he saw in his prophecy. And then, he said, from Aram, after he told the parable, he interpreted its matter and said that the instructions of the parable was how Balak guided him from the Aram, etc. What was said in the parable? We'll need to ask Balaam or Balak. The Torah didn't bother to tell us. It did choose to share with us the meaning of his words. And these, Rabbi Ovadia Sforno will explain in a relatively plain sense approach. The last commentator whose method I'll mention is the Or HaChaim. In his view, Balaam thought that when Hashem didn't tell him what to say, he was given permission to do as he pleased. So he began arranging his parable, Mishalon, in his mind. That is, the things he wanted to say. When the time came to lift up, Laset, that is, to shout his parable, the parable got mixed up. Things he had never thought of started flowing from his mouth, and thus he became a parable and a mockery in his own right. Like Sforno, the Or HaChaim says the Torah doesn't share Balaam's parable with us. Unlike him, he believes that the reason for this is that they were never uttered. In other words, the difference between the methods would be if we could raise Balak from the dead. According to Sforno, the ancient king could probably share Balaam's exact words. According to the Or HaChaim, resurrection won't help. Do I now know how to relate to the plain meaning of the parables? Not necessarily. But I do know that now I can call myself Dovi Holtz, one who loves Mishalim and Tanakh. In memory of my beloved and heroic student, Amichai Shimon ben Ishai and Batya Rubin, Hashem Yikom Damo.